Eccoci, siamo online in diretta. Buonasera a tutte e a tutti. Come sempre inizio a parlare in italiano, ma a brevissimo passerò all'inglese perché abbiamo un ospite che viene dal Brasile, che in realtà è in Brasile e quindi adesso passo all'inglese per presentare appunto il nostro ospite. So I'm switching to English right now just to be just you can understand what I'm saying. Thank you, João, for first of all for accepting our invitation, and it's nice to have you here.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
I'm glad to have you here. I don't know, what time is it in Brazil right now?
It is 2
Okay.
and
So
30
yes,
p.m.
okay. Here is almost dinner time, and I'm glad to have you here, especially because you have worked on a very, very interesting indie game, Dandara, and Dandara features a lot of Brazilian cultural references. And for example, the game protagonist is inspired by the legendary Brazilian character Dandara dos Palmares. So during your talk, you are going to tell us more about the game development and the reception by the players. And before you start, let me introduce you properly. I'm going to read your biography just to avoid any mistake. So I prepared it on screen. João Brant met his business partner, Lucas Matos, at the Computer Science University. Together, they made the Long Hat House, a game studio that focuses not only on making meaningful experiences, but also surprising the player. After all, a magic trick only really works if you are not expecting it. Long Hat House made Dandara, considered by Time magazine as one of the 10 best games of 2018. The expansion, Trials of Fear Edition, also won Apple's Best Apple TV Game of 2020. So I give you the floor. You can share your lecture. I'm going to be in the background, and I'm going to collect all the questions for the Q&A session at the end of the lecture. So thank you again, and it's your turn now.
All right. So, hello everybody. I hope you're having a great afternoon, great evening, and welcome. I'm gonna talk a bit about Dandara, and let's go. Well, the first thing I'm gonna explain is what Dandara is, more generally. Dandara is a game that started mobile and ended up being this somewhat big game from 4 people standards, right? You can see the team over here. And it was published by Raw Fury. And it went to probably all the platforms as well. And I would like to show the trailer. I think the trailer is better than explaining the game than I am. So Andrea, if you can help me right now. And play it from the beginning. Right. Thank you. All right. So this game got a lot of love from the mechanics that are different. You don't move at all in the game. You just jump like a zigzag from surface to surface. And people like that it was a cultural game, I guess, uh, and how we introduced our own culture, Brazilian culture, and how that felt natural and fitting for the narrative as well. So let's talk about who am I guess. Just like Andreas told you, I know I am from Belo Horizonte in Brazil. It's in the middle of Brazil. It doesn't have like a shore, so it's not very known. But I know I've met my business partner, who is also on Head House, on my university computer science, and we didn't stop making games since. So I'm gonna explain a bit about our line of thought for making this game and what we learned about it. That's the presentation. So before Dandara, we made this game called Magenta Arcade, and well, it was our first game. We didn't we didn't know how to go to consoles, even though that's what we wanted, right? We had to do something mobile because at the time it was, when you look at Steam, it was Steam green light. You had to do like a campaign to put the game there, and we didn't want to like make a campaign without knowing how to make games, without knowing if you could make a game together, if we knew how to do that. We wanted to test exactly that. So mobile was just make a game and publish it, and that's what we've done. But we still wanted to do something that was surprising for the player from day one. We wanted to, that's a very good, important value for us. And we didn't want to put those, those controllers on top of the screen. Wanted to do something that felt native to the platform. So we did this game where your fingers is the ship for a shmup, for a shooting up, right? If you put your finger, you start shooting upwards, just like the GIF. And if you remove your finger, you are invincible for a while, but you can advance without defeating the enemies. So it was a very different game. I think it was a success, even though it wasn't a financial one, and prove it to ourselves that we can keep making games. So we started a new prototype. This is the controllers on top of this thing. This is what I mean. And we wanted to, we still feel that we couldn't go to consoles yet. We didn't know. It was 2016, 2017. Consoles weren't still like available as they are today. They are a little bit more available today, I guess. And we went mobile. Like, we learned a lot with Magenta Arcade and wanted to apply that knowledge. And we started to make this game where you control your characters through swipes with both your fingers. And this is the story, more or less. This is the very first idea, I guess, prototype we drew, translated, right? And this is the very first day of the prototypes, and this is where the prototype was growing up into. And there you go. I think maybe making the game native to mobile for both of these games made them new, right? Made the surprise the player something that could be achieved. And we started adding doors to the rooms, right? It would be like a linear level, and we started like, maybe we should add 2 doors and to make the player explore and go grab a key. And suddenly it was a search action game, a Metroidvania game, right? Just 2 doors and you need, and it felt really good because we didn't feel there was a lot of exploration games on mobile at the time. We couldn't see that. We just saw the games where it opens a menu and there's level 1, level 2, level 3, and you choose the linear levels. And we felt that would be like doubly surprising the player, right? So we started to think about telling a story, and the first party we had was let's make a really buff guy with machine guns, shooting aliens, and in space because the character already jumps in this zigzaggy manner. So space would be great. And we started thinking just like Contra or Metal Slug or Mega Man X or something like that. And we started feeling, of course, this is really generic and it wouldn't surprise the player at all, right? They've seen that already. And we started thinking about culture. Like in Contra or Metro, like Contra is a very militaristic game about wars. It was like a Japanese game made to sell on America. Like very simplifying and generalizing, but it's kind of that. And we that didn't have anything to do with us, right? It wouldn't be our story in any way. All the other references to retell that story would be other games. So we would like just recycle it and wouldn't be interesting, would be surprising. You know? So we started to make something Brazilian. Like that's the fix, the way we could do that. And oh, all right, we started to look at that, and immediately when we started to think about something Brazilian, we thought really hard to look into other games to find inspiration, right? So we had to like look what is outside the window, what is on the streets, what other media, right? And we had an advantage of proximity. We would be anything that we would talk about would be easier for us to talk about it, to research about it. And when like the first thing that we reject about it is when we go and think about Brazilian culture in a general sense, and we immediately comes to mind an image like this, like our folklore, like joined in one image. The art style really doesn't even match, and all that, and it's really infantilizing, you know. And we saw a lot of people like trying to do something Brazilian and opening this as a list and trying to force everything in on a game together to make the game really Brazilian, but we really wanted to avoid doing that because it would be shallow, right? Every kind of creature in the folklore, every kind of element that we have in the legends has its own histories and has its own history and decisions and sociology linked to it, and we didn't want to put it in a very shallow way and put a lot of them, and some of them doesn't even have like a relationship to each other. Some of them come from black enslaved legends. Some of them come to native American people. Some of them come from the Portuguese, and they don't. If you really mix and match as they are the same thing, you would like do a disservice, right? And we started thinking about, oh, maybe I should go really specific. I think you could do like some part of a mythology and really be specific about it would be good. But we started thinking about a historical setting. That was we went into. So the mechanics of the game already had shooting and conflict. So we started thinking about a historical setting that had conflict. And we thought about Quilombo dos Palmares. So to talk about Quilombos, we got to talk a little bit about Brazilian history and slavery. Slavery on Brazil was pretty terrible. I mean, it was the last. Sorry for the motorcycle, I guess. Brazil was the last country in the Americas to abolish slavery, and it was pretty brutal here. And this Quilombo dos Palmares happened in the 1700s. And what is a Quilombo? A Quilombo is a set of settlements um, where black and enslaved people would run off to resist against the crown. And Quilombo dos Palmares was the biggest and most enduring Quilombo. It endured for more than 100 years, which is more than the Soviet Union, which is pretty great and made it be very, very notorious, right? And had a lot of characters associated with it. Zumbi dos Palmares, Dandara, Ganzumba. There's a lot of characters, and Dandara is the most mysterious out of all of them because who told the story of the Quilombo was the Portuguese crown, and they didn't do it very respectfully, of course, right? Because they ended up defeating the Quilombo and writing about it. So Dandara was mostly passed from generation to generation story, and there's debate even if she existed or not. But the legend that passed through all the generations survived. So it's a really important legend and really powerful symbol for Black resistance in Brazil. And they said she was a leader, a strategist. She fought in wars, right? She organized everything inside. She was super mysterious and inspiring. But we started making this game. We started making like pre-development, right? The character and the setting, and we thought about it. It took 2 weeks, I guess, and we thought about it. It would be a huge responsibility to talk about Brazilian slavery in the game. With the game without gravity, it would be really hard for us. Because we were two, like you saw the team that in the end was 4, but even then would be pretty hard to tackle doing a very good game and doing a very respectful historical allegory at the same time, and both being very good, right? Would be one or the other, and that would be a really huge disservice. And Brazil has a very bad relationship with its own slavery. What I mean is that with its own history of slavery. What I mean is that there's a lot of racism today. There's a lot of racial inequality, and there's people that deny slavery. It's all of that discourse. It's terrible, and if you do like a disservice, like making a lie about, making something that isn't really true about Quilombo dos Palmares, or making something that misrepresents and it's disrespectful, it's a very bad thing for a country, I guess. And we didn't went through with that. We thought about it and decided not to do a direct allegory, nor a historical setting. We wanted to do a metaphorical story about something that seeing people around us deal with, and make it very mysterious, because we didn't have writers as well in the team, and we didn't want to put a lot of text in the game and explain ourselves and explain the message of the game. We wanted to do a very show don't tell kind of game, and we ended up with this metaphorical story, very open to interpretation, and the character survived the transition. The Dandara dos Palmares inspired character, and she brought her name into the game. And what was really interesting about that is that by doing a reference, we brought all the symbolism in the game, and it's very important that you know that she means liberty and fighting for minorities. It really is important to fully understand the game. And we started making a lot of references as well. For example, this is a very important painting in Brazil from a painter called Tarsila do Amaral, and we made this character called Tarsila that represents the visual arts in the game. The entire visual arts, it's represented by her. For example, the musician of the game, the composer of the game, Tomás, you saw his photo back a few slides. is also representing the music of the game. For example, right? There's this cupcake. There's a famous graffiti on Belo Horizonte and our city, and it's all over the Village of Arts, the first level in the game, to make the symbol of this very alive, artful city that has all kinds of art, right? And just like it represents a bit in Belo Horizonte, so by doing a lot of references, it imbued the game with a lot of meaning, right? And Dandara being the name Dandara, people asking why would like make it intentional, make it look that it is intentional. People are gonna ask for those references, and it really helps like having references and you know what is the reference, what it is, to be an exploration game, a Metroidvania game, because you want to explore more, wants to see what the next thing is, right? So if they have any meaning in the real life, it's even better. So results, how people reacted. The game received several awards. Andrea talked about Time magazine, that was amazing. Apple gave us Game of the Year for the Apple TV, that was really amazing as well. Representation was important. People saw themselves being represented. People from Brazil saw their homes being represented and reacted really strongly, positively, strongly to that. And the Brazilian reaction was different than the foreign reaction, and it was very interesting how both of them was very positive in their own way. Uh, the Brazilians felt finally saw a game that shows what they see now on the streets. We put a lot of uh, things that exist on Latin American streets a lot, and people really saw that for the first time in a game, right? And keeping wondering what the next reference is really good. And the foreign reaction for non-Brazilians is a very different world that's fun to explore. Finally, something that isn't. I'm gonna talk about how we repeat ourselves a lot, right? Like with Contra and Mega Man X. So it's something different that's fun to explore. Helps to be an exploration game, and the elements doesn't feel random. Uh, like the game wasn't universally loved, of course, but I didn't see someone feel that the game was random. That's really good. I think because the references already have relationship between them, and that seems intentional. It's not enough to be intentional. It is intentional, but it has to seem intentional, right? And the elements fell together, and people really tried. For example, here is it's someone on Reddit trying to interpret the story of the game, and that person isn't Brazilian. We had a lot of videos. All of that, it's really good. So I think it was a success. And if you look how the game began as a premium mobile game, that was our second game. This is really good, right? So I'm really happy with it. So what we learned about it and the importance of culture, I guess. Didn't have a better title for this, but the first thing when we do something like this is the importance of standing out. You know, right? More and more games available every day. We repeat each other all the time. We make games about games all the time, and we need to do something new to survive. That's the importance of surprising the player. A financial importance to that. There's an experiential importance to that as well, but that's a financial one. And restrictions are powerful, right? Just like when we made a game trying to be native to mobile, it made us create a very different game. Restricting ourselves to bringing our culture to the game, it also made us have to be really creative, and you have to take inspiration from really unusual places. And yeah, that was really good. But wait, I'm thinking like people call Dandara a lot as a cultural game, and that's really weird to me. what is a cultural game, right? I think Okami is an inspiration for us. Because I was really uneasy about doing a game about my own culture, but I remember playing Okami and reading developer interviews about it, and that released a lot of my anxiety of people not knowing, because Okami is a very, very cultural game, very about Japanese history, and that was an inspiration, I guess. And both of them are cultural games, right? And these games, the Tension, a Taiwanese game about, and they take from the Chinese occupation on Taiwan as a means to do horror. They do horror inspired on that, and that's very creative. This game that made with collaboration with the Inupiat tribe from Alaska, Never Alone. You don't like, these games are cultural, right? You don't even think about it, but it was a non-cultural game. If there are cultural games, there are non-cultural games, right? That's what bothers me about this. You would think like a game like this is non-cultural, but all right. If you look at it, it's obviously very cultural. It's a very Americanized game, militaristic and all that, and from America even. So it's America talking about themselves a little bit. If you think about it, there's more difficult things. For example, this is Dead Rising, a Japanese game about you being stranded on the American mall, fighting zombies. That's very Dawn of the Dead kind of thing, but it's still talking about culture, right? Even if it tries to, just like Contra, if it's trying to do an American setting to be more familiar to players, to the audience, it is talking about culture. It is a cultural game. This one, I mean, football is all over the place. It's a very it's very everywhere, right? It's omnipresent, it seems, but it comes from a very specific place. The football culture and the games about it. Chess. If you go to a Native American person, they don't know what a knight is or a bishop, right? That's a very cultural thing. And even though it's everywhere and everyone practices it, and it's an awesome game, it's a very cultural game as well. So my point is that every game is cultural, and some cultures are more preeminent than others. What I mean is, even we as Brazilians, I see a lot of games made about shooting zombies on shopping malls, or Viking games. Viking games everywhere, right? So some cultures are so preeminent in the mainstream that even other people make games about that. So this is a form of imperialism. I mean, we are recreating the mainstream because it's safe and forget about our own culture. All right. Uh, the uniqueness comes from being outside the mainstream, not from the culture. That's the point. So why your own culture then? It's not just about adding a different thing, right? It's not just about surprising the player. It's a culture that you fully understand and that you have the advantage, like all the symbolism, everything, the history behind every image, everything, you can know about that and be really intentional about what you're gonna put in the game, what you're gonna omit from it. So it's very difficult to do that when you do a game about a militaristic guy for me, right, on space shooting with a machine gun. The game is better because it's you making it. I mean, what I mean is, I don't want to like spit a rule. That's an expression for in Brazil. I don't want to say that you should only make games about your own culture. That's the only valid thing. Of course not. But the game is better because it is you making it. You have the most ease of not you stereotyping yourself. And if I am making a game about Japan or something like that, I'm gonna have a lot of trouble not doing that. I can do that. I can do a game that's very respectable, very nuanced, and bring something new to the table from the culture that's totally Japanese. It is possible, but it's gonna be harder, right? Uh, it's stories that your own culture, like outside from the mainstream, stories that you would not be known about anybody. That's a lot of value as well, right? Always a unique point of view about society or the world. It's very good. Like I'm saying here from the point of view of players, that's a very good way of, like, it's just good to see other points of view, right? It enriches yourself. It's a good experience, like reading a lot of books from a lot of backgrounds. It enriches you, made a better comprehension of yourself in the world. That's good just by itself, right? So why don't we do it more often? First thing, of course, we tend to make games about what we like, and probably other games, so we make games about other games. There's no way around that. And widespread gaming tools, it's not because I don't think that's why, but when it got widespread, I guess what happened, I don't know exactly what happened. For example, in Italy, in the Italian industry, but in Brazil it happened like this. The tool was widespread, and everyone, and a lot of people started showing up with their passion project, and they took 8 years to do it, 6 years to do it, and it's a failure, like a financial failure. And everyone was like, no, that is a horrible movie. I don't want to see that ever again. And we need to play it really safe and sustainable. And let's find a way to do the safest games possible so we don't fail and it isn't horrible, and we can like someday make a passion project, not now, right? So, and cultural games, games with another culture that's not from the mainstream, do not appear as in media as much. So these games are very risky in a business sense. So business is very objective and very, it's easier to sum A plus B and have a result. So we started focusing on that. I think that's a state we are on game development, and it's in the other spectrum of things. It's art, right? It's trying to express yourself, and we have right now. It's what I feel from working in Dandara. Take it with a grain of salt. The tendency of treating games more as business than art. A good example of that is when I used to ask a politician, like, how can you? Is there some public project for making games? For increasing games and for the industry and all that, and they're like, no, we already have startup problems. Game companies in the beginning are startups, and the problem about that is that when you are in a startup environment, games always lose every time. We're gonna compete for the investor money, and the investor is gonna ask, what do you bring to society that's new? And you're gonna answer, well, I make games. It's not really new, and my competitor is Ubisoft or something, and you're gonna lose all the time. So it's a very good example that we don't thrive on business environments, and because we want to be safe and look like when we are beginning, and when we are teaching new developers, we care a lot about objective metrics. How is the audience of that game, the size of the audience, the niche, right? The sales, the good cases. Let's study the good cases. Mobile metrics went over to games a lot, and I think player experience started being a bit secondary, and objective metrics is, in a way, when you are very safe and you want to do something that it's proven, you're going to replicate something. We say all the time about not following a trend, not go after it. But when you are very objective, you are in a way following a trend, because you have to seek uh, other good cases to go after. For example, when I was making Dandara, people were like, "Why not something else? Can you prove that a Brazilian game is financially possible?" And I cannot. I couldn't at all, right? And if I followed that line of thought, I would just give up. And I see publishers all the time as well. I talk with them. Was published by Ralph Fury, and when they are asked about what do you care about games, what make you want to publish them, and they always there is like they are solid on business. They have a solid plan. They have a team that can do it. Yes, they do talk about that, but the most important thing is always something very subjective, like this game clicked with me. This is I found the magic. That kind of the experience was X, Y, and Z, and that comes way more from an art spectrum than from the business spectrum. And what I mean is, let's start talking about art in a useful way. I mean, I'm not gonna try to prove that games are art, and this debate can be very useless, because I feel like back in 2012, when all the articles, "Our games art," are popping up all the time, we were saying like, okay, games are art. Yes, and concluding and still treating them as products. We can improve our vocabulary of player experience in all of this, because it is very stunted, our vocabulary, I feel, it's today. For example, talking about genres like RPG, action, strategy, it's a very good way for players to find your game, but that never was made for us to design games. So we are still like holding on to this to what journalism is using to make hype for the games, and using that language to design, I think, design games and things that happens in the whole world, still, because we don't trying to care about the player experience, discussing about it and improving our vocabulary. And funding as well it's very important, because what I said about startups, games need a whole separate way to think funding from technology startups, and looking at it critically, like getting a critical look about things, not only culture, but also history. Talking about politics in games, we don't do that very much, and the player experience, what the player is thinking about, what the player is expecting, what is the player learning. I think you should ask those questions more, and I say that because we can like improve our vocabulary, add people from other medium to talk with us in a very meaningful way, talk better in events in schools, all of that. Understanding how our place as artists is very good for funding and organize ourselves politically and asking for things, and where culture comes in all this, because I think that's the key to bringing more culture is through art. We need to talk more artfully about games in order to make more games about culture to appear, to about culture that are not from the scene, that thinks about that and have and critically things, where does it come from, and what do I want the player to feel, think, and learn, all of that. Culture can be both an ends to that. We end up talking more about that, and a means. We want to talk about culture, so we are gonna have to bring more artistic development and talks, conversations to our games. So this is what I learned. This is what I feel is the main obstacle for culture in games. And don't forget that games is a medium of art and culture. Everything about them, funding them, developing them, and talking about them. And thank you. That is the presentation. Oh, I can't hear you, Andrea.
Sorry. Yes, I had the microphone. Okay, now do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. I think your lecture was very intriguing and interesting. So we have some questions from the public, and I'm going to put them on screen.
Sure.
So you can. The first one from Matteo. When developing in for Brazil, how important is focusing on performance on low-range mobile devices?
This can be tricky, but I think it depends. I think when you think about accessibility, it's really important for the game to be able to work on on low-end devices, Android devices mainly. That's where a lot of people play games. But to get the game known, it's depends. When it's a very artistic game, a very game with a stance, a game where you play it once and the player doesn't play it anymore. These kinds of games, it's very important that the mainstream journalism, the mainstream media reaches it. It's very important for that. So for Dandara, I mean, it was very important to get more important get them to know and spread about the game first, because people that play those games from Brazil get know the games from the international media, and that is a problem, right? But you can, for example, make a game focusing about that, and then develop, not launch with low-end devices, and develop the integration later, which is good for thinking, for developing the game in a smart way. Don't start on low-end devices if you feel you need the international media.
Okay, thank you. We have another question, so let's see the other one. Digital games can also be misinterpreted other than misused. Did any of your players totally misunderstood the game or misplayed it? Is it possible to play the game transgressively?
I think that's a very good question. I mean, because the game is so open to interpretation, and trying a wrong interpretation is a correct way to play the game, right? But I feel sometimes the game gets it looks very political on the trailer or something like that, and people don't even engage with it. They just shut it off. I think that's the worst thing that happens. But it's very hard for a game like Dandara. But I seen it happens with a lot of media, right? Including games, I guess. People don't understanding, or it can be an album, it can be a music, it can be a movie. We saw it happens all the time, right?
Okay. I also have a question for you. What do you think about the representation of women in digital games? And what choices did you make to design your main character? Because I think it's an important thing.
Yeah, Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, because there was a lot of characters from Quilombo dos Palmares that could pick, and Dandara would be representative to women as well, as a very like she comes from the 700s and she fought in wars at the same time. She's a pretty important symbol for women as well, right? But I feel that representation for women is getting better when you think about characters in games, like main characters. It is getting better for sure, but it's still pretty bad on when you representation is not just in the stories, it's also on the teams, and that's still pretty bad, I guess. Has a lot to improve.
Okay, thank you. And another question, could you tell us something more about references to contemporary Brazil in the game, maybe politics or society, something more about that? Because I think you said that the game is a metaphorical. Are there any specific references to modern contemporary Brazil?
Contemporary Brazil, no, right? But it has reflectors. For example, we have a boss, the very first boss, which is the symbol for the very first kind of oppression. Is like we thought about a guy that says, "Oh, you can do this, you can do that," an authoritarian guy, and we, for the reference for that, we got a general from the dictatorship, right? A general. We thought about a general, but that has a lot of meaning for us Brazilians because of the dictatorship, the military dictatorship that happened from 64 to the 90s. And it came without that meaning, and that has totally repercussions today. We have all our own alt-right is very, I love the dictatorship in Brazil, so it has a lot of reflections on that, but it's not contemporary. I feel that getting a very contemporary reference that seems important now has to be very well thought, right? Because you're going to be launching a game in 2, 3, 4 years, and that maybe is just stale by then and doesn't mean anything to anyone. So you gotta think about that. Okay. A lot.
And last question, could you tell us something about your next project, if you can?
Yeah, I mean, our next project, I really wanted to show something.
Okay.
But it's so early in development and so ugly with all the placeholders. And it's 3D placeholders, so it's even worse.
Okay. But is it something related to Brazilian culture, or is it a different game?
We're going to go all gas, no breaks into the Brazilian culture this time.
Okay.
Like we learned about it, just like on the first game, we learned about the mobile kind of way. This time we learn a lot about culture and things that we would do. We would be inspired differently from Brazilian culture. I'm gonna go all out on that, but still like in a way that everyone can enjoy, right? Everyone can play and understand the game even better than Dandara. Dandara has some difficulties with that, and that's it.
Okay. Thank you very much. There are no more questions, so I think we are almost there. And so thank you very much for accepting our invitation. I want to thank you again because I think it was very interesting, and this video is going to be helpful even after this lecture because it is going to be there on our YouTube channel and Facebook page. So I think that people can use it as a reference also after this lecture. So thank you again.
All right. Thank you so much for inviting and everything. Thank you all of you that were watching for watching that. Rainbow.
So now I'm switching to Italian just for a while. Per oggi la giornata degli Eevee Pro Days finisce, ci vediamo domani l'ultima giornata con altre lecture, interviste, con l'evento conclusivo delle 5 e buona serata a tutti e a tutte e grazie ancora. Ciao.
Ciao. See ya.